That logo screen.
Mhm.
This is our new logo that we just put together this past year.
Hello, everybody.
There we go. That's it. What do you think?
I love it. That's pretty.
All right, and as we get started,
Hey,
Fantastic.
this is Horst Schmidt, and this is at the Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition. Tonight's show is What If I Sneeze Outdoors? How Michigan is planning for COVID responsible recreation. And with us tonight is Conan Smith, who is the director of the Michigan Environmental Council in Lansing. And we're going to be talking about how the state is responding to the need for safe outdoors activities in the light of the COVID thing. But before we start, I'd like to ask Conan if he could tell us a little bit about himself. I know he's been commissioner in Washington County for 14 years and has a lot of governmental experience, but you also have a lot of experience with nonprofits, is that right?
Yeah, and Horst, thanks so much for inviting me up to do this. I love the UP so much, and it is hard in this season not to feel comfortable traveling up to see you. So this is a nice way to make that happen elsewise. Yeah, so I run this organization called the Michigan Environmental Council. We are a coalition of about 70 environmental groups all over the state. From Detroit to Houghton. So we cover pretty much every corner of Michigan. And our job is to manage environmental policy on behalf of that coalition in Lansing. So we work with the legislature when they want to create a new law. We work with the administration when there are rules that need to be passed or permits that need to be approved or disapproved. And then our other big role is just making sure that the movement itself is really strong and vibrant and well connected and able to do its job in defending the environment. It's a cool group. I am still relatively new here as the CEO. I started last May. As a matter of fact, Horst, I think I was coming up to you. This would have been my second week on the job a year ago, and about that time, I think you and I started talking about me making a tour de Nord, and when I first came up and I met you and Evan and the crew, that was really fun.
Yeah.
We are growing as an organization, which is really cool. I'm excited to have brought on about 5 new staffers over the last year, and so we're in our force in the capital now. Before I came to MEC, I was a county commissioner in Washtenaw County. I represented the city of Ann Arbor for 14 years, and I did pretty much everything a county commissioner does. I served on the Parks Commission for 14 years, so all the public lands stuff. I did that. I did economic development, served on the Governor's Talent Investment board. So Governor Snyder appointed me to help oversee talent development. How do we get more and better jobs in the state of Michigan? With Tony Ratasky, I don't know if you know Tony. He's from Marquette, I think. I think he's from Marquette. One of the labor leaders up there. And let's see, what else did I do as a commissioner? Worked on the Workforce Development Board, helped start this thing called Michigan Saves, which does energy efficiency and renewable energy investments, helps citizens and businesses improve their homes and businesses. And I served on this board called the Utility Consumer Participation Board. Governor Granholm and Governor Snyder both appointed me to that board. And what we did is fund rate case interventions. So whenever a utility wants to raise your rates, we were right in the thick of it by funding nonprofits to get expert testimony and defend the rights of consumers. One of the challenges there was their biggest grantee was the Michigan Environmental Council. So when I took over at MEC, obviously there had been a conflict of interest there. So I wasn't on that board anymore. But it was a lot of fun while it lasted. And now I get to be on the fighting side. So I know in the UP, we've had a lot of energy challenges with cost, and we're in the thick of that, working with the advisory council that's trying to assess impacts of Line 5, but also we're writing those rate cases, working with the utilities to make sure that we have more clean energy, but most importantly, sustainable and reliable energy that residents can afford. So that's another one of our big issue areas. I'm born and raised in Ann Arbor. You guys will see a little bit of my house behind me. This was my grandparents' house. They moved here in '45, and I bought it from their estate. And it's about 10-minute walk to Main Street. I'm kind of a homebody, so I like it here. I went to the University of Michigan. Practically grew up in this town. So, but they let me out every once in a while, and I get to come do stuff like this. And now I get to do it visually or video link right from my home, so I don't even have to leave. So that's me, man.
Well, thanks, Conan, for that. Before we get started, why don't Evan introduce yourself and give us the rules of engagement for our guests tonight.
Hi, I'm Evan Zimmerman, the Vice President of UPEC, and we'll be streaming this live on YouTube, and we'll be collecting comments through Zoom chat, through YouTube comments, and through our Facebook event. So you can post a comment on any one of those, and we'll be monitoring them for questions. And I will relay the questions over to Conan, or I will answer the questions or send them to Horst. We can answer anything you'd like to know from any of us. So please participate. And if you see this stream after it's live, we'll check back and try to answer your questions after the broadcast. So thank you for being here.
Okay. You want to give us the introduction to our show tonight? Musical introduction.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have a theme for this show, and it is summertime.
Summertime, and living is easy. The short jumping, and the cotton is high.
Okay, it is summertime, although it doesn't seem like it with getting frost up here in the UP tonight. And so I wanted to explain to our audience that Conan and I were working together with a number of other people trying to come up with ideas for safe recreation in Michigan for the DNR. And so I thought after we finished that this would be a great show for people to find out exactly what we can do and can't do, and maybe there's gray areas that we have to deal with. And I think the big problem is every time a question is asked, it could be yes, it could be no, it could be maybe, we don't know. So that throws people into a tailspin at times. And what I wanted to do is have Conan and I discuss what some of the ideas that we came up with, and also to encourage you to ask questions, and we will try to see if we can answer them or at least start a conversation around them. So Conan, you want to give us a little more background on what we were doing that day and where it came from?
Sure. So, the governor's executive orders over the last couple of months have really focused on shutting the state down to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And that impacted just about every business in the state of Michigan. It also impacted all of our recreational areas, both public and private. As Michigan comes through this crisis, like we're down now on the down slope of it, and cross our fingers that continues. The governor's team identified 6 phases of relative safety, and those give us the opportunity to reopen the state, reopen our businesses, reopen our state facilities, reopen our recreation areas. But this virus, we don't understand it as well as I think we would all like to. And so in reopening, there are a number of risks, right? We don't want to give it an opportunity to reestablish itself, and we don't want to put any more of our vulnerable citizens at risk. So the governor, as the executive orders that we're currently under begin to expire, the governor said, well, we need a robust plan for reopening the Michigan economy in a way that makes sense. Not every business is the same, not every industry is the same, not every region of the state is the same. And so we need to think through each of those parameters, try and design pathways for our economy to reopen while still keeping our state safe. One of the first areas of focus for the administration was outdoor recreation and outdoor recreation industries. We were really fortunate at MEC that she tapped one of our former staff members. In fact, my direct predecessor as CEO, this guy named Brad Garman, to lead the outdoor recreation work group. Is housed within the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, LEO, and its purpose was to, in a very short timeline, over the course of 1 week, assemble 100 advisors who have both business and consumer interests in the outdoor recreation industry, see if we could generate some consensus around the strategies necessary for businesses to reopen. And as you guys know, Michigan has a huge tourism economy. It's our number 3 economy, and it's our number 3 industry, excuse me. And if we aren't smart about sustaining it, a lot of lives and a lot of jobs could be lost. Lives could be hurt and jobs could be lost. So we want to make sure that we are able to reopen the tourism industry in ways that are safe and are still like effective for communities. One of the things that we also know from other research that's been done, I think this was coming out of Michigan State University, is that the people who are active in the tourism economy are often living on the edge, so there's a whole lot of just out of poverty level income that people who work in that industry are living on. And so if you don't have a month or 2 months of income from that industry, and there aren't good solid replacements for it, that has very dire consequences, not just to your personal lives, but to the communities that you live in, and everything that follows through with that, from public health to economic development to just the very sustainability of our neighborhoods and our towns. So all that's sort of a long way to say the governor wanted us to make sure that we had a good pathway for reopening outdoor recreation industry. About 100 of us got together over the course of a week and tried to apply all the knowledge that we had garnered from other industry groups, from the Centers for Disease Control, from the state's industry and public health organizations, and put together a strategy for this industry to reopen. My role there was actually fairly limited. I was a liaison mostly for organizations like UPEC. We want the UPEC members to have a voice in this as well. So we reached out and convened a number of our member organizations to ask them about their own priorities and their concerns. And I think, Horst, really what I heard out of that process was a real tension, the desire to keep tourist-oriented economy communities safe, but also a recognition that those economies need to reopen in order to keep the citizens in the towns vibrant. And so we carried those messages back into this process, which resulted in a 40-page document, a long set of recommendations. Poor Brad stayed up all night on a Thursday night because he was furloughed that Friday, and the Friday was the day the report was due. So he and his team did real yeoman's work over the course of a week, and I think they came out with some really nice, simple, straightforward recommendations for how industry can reopen. And they run the gamut from access controls for visitors to sanitation in those places, and how we maintain the social distancing parameters that we've already become accustomed to. Stuff like that, designed to keep us all safe and designed to let us reopen the whole of the outdoor recreation industry. So that was the work. Hey, Horst, I think you're muted.
Am I muted? Oh my God.
You're back.
There we go. I'm unmuted. All right. What I wanted to mention is I read an article about how we expectorate out of our mouth, depending upon what we're doing. And
Yeah.
it was really a real eye opener for me because the more harder you work, you're going to have to breathe harder. If you're going to shout, you're going to, your droplets are going to go further. Where you are, where the wind or the air conditioning or the heating is blowing, it's really interesting to see all the different variations that you can all be in the same office. One side gets the COVID and the other side gets nothing.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what I think we want to make sure is that it's basically a spread by our respiratory system. And that's the primary reason for all our concern, because the contagion of being out there, and if you're in the middle of the woods, you're not by yourself, that's fine. There's nothing there. Once you get into the areas where people gather, parking lots, restaurants, the restrooms, and all of the buildings that any particular facility has are the ones where most of the danger comes in. So what we wanted to do at that meeting from that point was just to say, well, what kind of ideas do we have? And one of the ones that came up was the idea of wind, and the idea that if you're outside, and this is where the title came from, what if I sneeze outdoors? And the answer is, depends upon which way the wind is blowing and who's downwind from you. So that's part of what we're talking about. What else did we come up with?
Really interesting.
Muted. Okay.
About interesting point about how we need to be cognizant of the people that we're around. So like everything in this, there are a set of variables that can result in greater or lesser exposure. So it's a question of if you are sick, if you are one of the people who has the virus, and maybe you're not showing symptoms, you may be asymptomatic and a carrier. The first variable is how much of that virus is in the air that you're expelling from your lungs. And if you're breathing in a shallow way, there's less virus in those upper sections of the lung. If you're breathing deep, like if you're singing, for example, or if you're shouting, you get more of the virus in the expectorant. Depending on how much force you're putting. You put a cough into the air, the virus particles from a cough can travel up to 8 feet. But if you're just, breathing naturally, you're talking, a few feet distance from you. So that's another kind of variable, like how hard are you breathing? So how much of the virus is in your lungs? How hard are you breathing it out? And then you think about the other side of it, the person who might be infected by you, their consideration is how much of it am I breathing in, right? So you have to get a certain number of viral particles inside your body in order for it to gain hold and actually infect you. So this is one of the reasons that distance becomes important, or density becomes important, or the wind or the air around you becomes important. So there's an opportunity to more widely disperse those particles without them collecting in a dense space like an indoor office, then you're going to be safer. So we know that certain activities, like if you're out running and you're not wearing a mask and you pass somebody on the trail, you're probably going to be okay, and they're probably not going to get infected. Why? Because when you're running, you're breathing shallow, and you're passing by that person very quickly, so there's not a lot of duration of contact. And so you got, I'm trying to do the math in my head. So you're moving past them quickly, so low duration, less likely to have the virus in you. And good gracious, Horst, I'm so sorry. It just slipped out of my head. There was a third variable. Oh, that you're outside, of course, like the thing we're talking about today. So you're in this big open environment, right? So there's more space for it to disperse and not to concentrate. So, that kind of activity is less risky than sitting in an office, even an office where somebody is 8 feet distant from you. If that person is sick, especially if they're sick and coughing. And so those are the kinds of like mathematics that go into the calculations around infectious disease. And I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not a public health expert, so I'm just learning this as a citizen like you as we go along. But I got my own exposure, so to speak, to all of this a lot through this process that we went through with the state over the last month and a half as well. So how do we take that knowledge then and apply it effectively to the situations that people might find themselves as they are recreating, either as industry people, either using the industry, as a consumer, or being an employee of outdoor recreation industry, or just being regular Joe going out to the woods and hiking on the trail. So we had to take all of those kinds of things into account as we tried to design those recommendations.
The other thing is the report that you got from the state about how to clean restrooms, and that it had timetables. You leave the say if you're in a pit toilet, how long do you leave it empty before the next person goes in? How often do you clean it? Is it every 24 hours, or is it every hour? There's of course a cost to all of this, so that has probably factors into it to some extent. But the point is that they're looking at all of these different facilities, whether it's the ranger station, whether it's the place where you stop to talk to the person who's checking to see if you are registered or you have to pay, the campgrounds, the shower rooms, and then of course the pavilions. So there are just many different areas, and the question is what pattern of cleaning, what length of time between cleanings, how frequently are people coming, and probably time of the day and day of the week are probably important factors as well. So what else do you recall us talking about?
So the whole point of the plan that we were working to develop is really to give confidence to consumers that when a facility is open, that it is reasonably safe, and to provide some really clear guidance to the businesses themselves about what makes that place safe. So the very first requirement coming out of this plan is that each and every facility has to have its own specific plan for administrative controls, right? So we've got to have an actual written plan for that facility that describes where the contact points are. So whether those are public restrooms or where you pay for the service, for example. Like we have to identify those places. All of the plans have to have a designated contact person who is responsible for design, monitoring, and implementation of that strategy. And that plan has to be, it has to incorporate both guidance for visitors as well as guidance for employees, so that you're looking at it from both perspectives. The other thing is about access, right? Like, we know that some businesses, some activities, there's not a lot of concentration of people in a certain place, but others there really is, right? So you have to have some guidance around access control. Think about what the governor has said, for example, about grocery stores and big box stores, where they have to limit the number of people who come in, or they have to have directional pathways down the aisles and the corridors. So in terms of access, there's a categorical designation for how many people you can have inside certain spaces. So depending on the size of the facility, whether it's 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 square feet, there are limits that are placed on the number of people who can come in, and some standardization around what that signage looks like. So you may have seen emerging through the community these blue boxes, right, that say "stand here." Some of that is part of this statewide strategy, so that everybody has the same basic understanding that, oh, this is part of our COVID response as a statewide community. The signage is similar. The behavioral indicators are common. Of course, social distancing, like, that remains one of the big critical practices moving forward. So the very first requirement is that we follow the CDC guidances around social distancing as they are laid out currently today. And, we're all getting pretty familiar with that, right? The 6-foot distance. And, I've seen some really fun and creative ways to maintain that distance. For example, I saw a couple of guys with fly rods, and they're like, I got a 6-foot fly rod and I keep my buddies 6 feet away using my fly rod. I saw 2 guys with hockey sticks, and those, I guess, are about 3 foot long. So, they were butt to butt with the hockey sticks, keeping themselves separated. So that distancing is important. The continued use of masks and face shields at the stores, like those big plexiglass shields that they put up, and of course the masks, which incidentally, like, the most important thing about a mask is that it captures the air coming out of your mouth. It's not so much that it blocks the air coming in. So you really want to make sure that, when you're out there, if you're feeling at all at risk, you're paying attention to what other people around you are doing. Like, if other people aren't wearing masks and you feel like you're in one of the risk categories, like, definitely keep your distance from that place. Of course, you mentioned sanitation. There's a whole set of required guidelines around sanitation as well. So, obviously the state has always had, the public health departments have always had guidelines for sanitation. Those are ramped up considerably. Specific types of cleaners are required, and like, extra attention is given to places like drinking fountains, right? I don't know if you've been in a public building recently, but a lot of the drinking fountains right now are just shut off, and that's just to maintain public safety. So, and I think that's probably gonna stay that way for a long time. But there are a lot of other touch points that we don't think about or haven't thought about that also require intensified sanitation. Vending machines. So, you're out at the canoe livery and you want to grab a pop before you go. There's often like a vending machine sitting right there outside the door. How many people are touching that? And you're getting up really close on that. So those are the kinds of things that have to have a little bit more attention paid to them. Hygiene, critically important. We just wash your hands, right? Like, that is the number one thing that we still need to do. And hand washing and the use of sanitizer needs to be ubiquitous if we're going to keep communities safe moving forward. And still the face masks, and making sure that people are also aware of when equipment has been cleaned. So if you're renting a bike to go out on the trail, or a kayak or a canoe or something like that, one of the new requirements is that there's a little label on that equipment that tells you the last time that it was cleaned. So as a consumer, you have greater confidence that people are maintaining those practices. And then moving on from there, there are a whole bunch of practices that have been identified around like how we work with volunteers, because we got to get people trained, right? Like our nonprofit organizations who maintain trails, for example, we all depend upon volunteers to make sure that those places are clean and that the trail is cleared, that sort of thing. We don't want to put them at risk, and we don't want them to exacerbate the problems that we might face as people come back into the out of doors. And so getting some good guidelines in place for training our volunteers, making sure they're aware of these best practices, making sure they're adhering to these best practices, all are sort of written into this big strategy. And I will say the breadth and depth of expertise that was sitting around that table during that week, it ranged from PhD public health advisors down to people like me who just are users of the outdoors. And the state did a really excellent job of hearing those concerns, both from industry and from consumers and users, and incorporating them into a strategy that I think really genuinely will keep us safe and allow us to reopen our tourism and recreation industry in ways that keep communities that, like many in the UP, that have not yet experienced massive outbreaks of COVID, to keep them safe moving forward. So there's a big plan, but
yeah. So Conan, I read a couple of DNR press releases that said, this particular park is not going to open until June 3rd because people have to be hired, they have to be trained, the facility has to be cleaned, and so this is one of these popular parks. And I think the question that comes to mind is there a way that the state is going to be able to tell people, why don't you go to this one instead of this one, because this one has a lot of people, and this one it doesn't have as many, and it'd be safer for you.
Yeah.
Bring that up at all during the meeting.
Brad and I talked about Brad Garman, who is the guy at the Department of Natural Resources who's in charge of this part of the plan. After they came up with the recommendations, he and I talked about that specifically because there isn't any tool out there. We have all this amazing technology, right? Like Evan, you're kind of a tech guy, right? Like we would be able to track people through their cell phone use, so we could see like when people are clustering at a certain park, and we should be able to notify folks before they even get there that this place is at capacity or it's over capacity, and like here's one that's 15 minutes down the road, so why don't you go there instead. I'm guessing that's going to have to be developed in the nonprofit or the private sector rather than through government, because it doesn't exist now. And Horst, they're on furlough. The state government's taken these massive hits to its revenue. They're going to lose about 30% of the general fund this year. And so a lot of the staff are, they got the same workload, but they're only being allowed to work 3-4 days a week.
Yeah, that is another issue of what I heard. There are 31,000 people that are furloughed on a Monday, Friday type of schedule.
Yeah,
if I recall, and I don't know if how much of that affects the parks people in terms of the workers who are doing the actual cleaning and getting the parks ready for service this summer. I think they might have a slightly different work schedule.
I know that DNR is planning on rolling out the opening of facilities on the basis of their traffic, right? So like how many people visit a given facility. Do you got to hike in? There's this place that I like to go to in northern Lower Peninsula called Hoist Lakes. It's a rustic campground. Literally the outhouse doesn't have a roof. It's basically like, you're in the outdoors with one little shield that's kind of falling apart. That place is probably going to be on the okay list because it's hard to get to. but Pinckney Recreation Area down the street from me, like I don't think that bathroom's going to open until July, because they're going to have to figure out how they get the staffing to make sure that it stays cleaned, for example.
Yeah. So, anything else we want to bring up before we close out?
I have one question for you.
Sure.
Conan, so when I go out of the house, I always wear a mask, especially if I'm walking down the street in the city, because I figure a lot of people will be going through. But I've noticed a lot of people don't like wearing masks outdoors. I'm sure the indoors is the most critical, but I wonder if there's a good piece of advice for people about when to wear a mask when they're outside.
So I think there's no hard and fast rule here, right? But if you are going into what you would consider a public place, it's best if you wear a mask. If you're going for a walk in your neighborhood, for example, and you're going to have one of those like casual passing of people, and you're able to maintain that 6 foot social distance, you're probably in a safer place, and you don't need to worry about people around you so much who aren't wearing masks. But if you're going to go anywhere where that social distancing might be compromised, put the mask on. It's better for everybody.
Thank you. I think that's great advice.
So, are there any other questions from our listeners?
We don't have any other questions right now, but please feel free to leave one for us.
Yeah.
Hey,
good.
Horst, one thing that I'd love to hear from you guys about, you and Evan, is about the tourism industry, and what are your concerns for the Upper Peninsula as tourism starts to ramp back up? You have not had very many cases of COVID in the UP. What happens when the hordes of Ann Arborites make their way to across the bridge?
Well, we'll encourage them to go to Traverse City.
Right. I'll put that on the website.
Yeah, right. But anyway, the traffic was down 62% over the bridge, and so that was our safety. And some people were saying, well, we should shut it down. Well, isn't very practical in terms of just simple things like getting food and gasoline up here.
Right.
So sometimes people overreact on some of these things without thinking about the consequences. But up here, I suspect what will happen is that there will be people who are positive, and they will go to places, and then they will cough, or someone will be close enough, then they're talking, and then that will do it. Because up here, I've noticed that most people go to the grocery stores, don't wear masks now. And so it's really interesting. Before it was that the employees didn't, then the employees were apparently told to wear masks. They're still wearing masks. And the other end of it, I think when the governor's last order came out, and the weather got warmer, that's all of a sudden people said, well, we don't need masks anymore to themselves. And so I'm seeing that, and then if new people are coming up here, then that's where we have the chance of infection spreading in the grocery stores, the shopping, big box stores, just the gas stations. If you're going into the gas station to pay for your gas instead of paying the little corner grocery stores, those are all small places, all opportunities for infection, especially if someone's coughing.
Right.
But I did a little calculation. I figured if we put people in the UP from east to west, 6 feet apart, 90% of a population would be standing across the middle of the UP. It's an idea of how little, how low the density is. However, our cities are just as vulnerable as anybody else's cities because the houses are close together.
Horst, you made that point to me when we were chatting before, right? That it's easy to think of the UP as a very sparsely populated place, but Marquette is not sparse. Marquette is a city.
Right, and that's where we'll probably see more infections. Marquette, I think, is the county with the most cases at this point. In part probably because of infections, but also because they have the better hospital facilities than most other areas in the UP. But I'm sure we're probably going to start seeing a line of infections as we watch people come up along the highways. Highway 2 and 75 and 28 are going to be routes of infection, so to speak. The other
Right.
side of it, of course, is the fact that people do want to come up here, and they, whether they discount the risk or whether they, are aware of it, they're going to come, and the businesses are want people, and they want to be able to survive and have the employees that they can pay, and not go into any type of bankruptcy. That's the big fear, because tourism is probably number 1 or number 2 up here.
Yeah.
Compared to the lower part of the peninsula. And so, and of course, also we have a much larger population of poor people in the UP. I think it's somewhere in the mid-20s is the poverty of the lower income individuals. So we have that kind of collision of public health versus the need to be able to obtain funds to pay for your daily living expenses, your rent and gas, and the kids need to have clothes and so on. So I think these are all the basic bread and butter issues that are always here, exacerbated by the COVID-19. And I don't see any easy answers for those people who are on the lower end of the income scale. Those of us who are retired, I don't see as much of a problem as for them, and then they're able to come and go as they please. So there's not that pressure that you have when you're a working person with family. So these are the kinds of things that we're seeing, that we're going to see, I guess, as people move up here. And I think Memorial Day, we had a big backup on leading up to the bridge for people to get onto this side of the state.
We're trying to share this recreateresponsibly.org website with as many people as possible who might want to be traveling at this point. And it lays out that there are 6 basic principles for you to be responsible in your outdoor recreation behavior. And those are: know before you go. Like, make sure that you know that a place is open before you head out to it, right? Plan ahead. Like, there's a lot of these places are going to have facilities like the bathrooms that are closed. And so if you start inundating the bathroom at the local gas station, it's going to cause problems for more people. So be thoughtful about things like that. That physical distancing is still important. You also, one thing that the UP is a lot of wild land, right? And people do adventurous activities up there. I know I've been backwoods backpacking in the Porkies. I've been trunching through the brush around the Fox and Two Hearted, and casting my fly rod there. You got to play it safe. You got to be smarter about where you're going in this time and place, because emergency services do not need to be overwhelmed by you getting injured out there on the trail. And so we're also encouraging people to not go if they don't have to, right? Stay closer to home, make more intelligent decisions about when you need to travel, want to travel, and make sure that you're only doing it as a necessity. And of course, don't leave your junk behind, right? Like we have in the outdoor recreation community, leave no trace is a mantra, but that is so much more important now with coronavirus. Like you can't like be leaving, don't drop your mask on the trail, don't leave your food wrapper behind, don't leave your plastic gloves laying in the parking lot. You know, every time you do something like that, you increase someone else's risk of exposure, perhaps. So, you know, those 6 principles become things that we need to embrace as we open this economy as consumers, right? Those are guidelines for users who are leaving home and coming to communities like that in the UP.
I noticed the Recreate Responsibility link was just put on our chat box.
Great. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Connie.
And we also had a couple of questions from Ruth Moore. One was about the availability of the report. We have that linked in Zoom chat, and we will be putting it on upenvironment.org, as well as the Recreate Responsibly link. And there's also one more question from Ruth. Are there guidelines for outdoor rescues, e.g. kayaking, hiking, etc.?
Not yet, to my knowledge. I know that public safety was one of the top 6 areas that the governor was creating the protocols for, but that was really more about public safety industry stuff, not about public safety practices. So the guidelines that this process was designed for are around reopening the economy. I'll have to dig into that a little bit, Ruth. Like I have not seen anything around rescues, but I can make a couple inquiries on Monday, right? It's not a holiday. All these days are mashing together. I'll make a couple inquiries on Monday, and I'll get back to Horst and Evan with what I learned, and you guys can maybe update people on the Facebook page or something. However you do it.
We will. Thank you.
I wanted to comment a second here. There's ads on TV, I think they're Michigan ones, about how to, you know, go encouraging people to get out and hike on our trails and things. But the Forest Service and the state lands are all closed for maintenance, but they'll let hikers on it, but they won't let us maintain it. So people are out there, they can get lost, they can get hurt because the trails, we're not allowed to maintain them yet, but they're encouraging people to hike on them, especially close to home. They're encouraging people not to travel, but they're letting hikers out there, but not letting us maintain the trails to keep them safe.
You know what? Was that Connie?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. I think that's really critically important. And we did talk about how we open up the opportunity for volunteers to get out and do this kind of work. But I don't know that we've moved past the recommendation of behaviors or practices stage to the actual reopening stage. I will follow up with Brad about that and get a sense of when he's got these contacts, obviously, with all the state lands pretty at his fingers, but I know he also works with U.S. Forest Service. They were part of this work group, for example. So I'll follow up with that as well, and we'll get it.
We don't mind not being able to use our chainsaws and stuff out there. That, you know, that's a reasonable request. You know, we don't want anybody to get hurt and then have to pull off EMTs and things. But hand saws and loppers and things, you're not likely to get hurt doing that. So we don't understand why they're encouraged to hike, but we can't maintain it.
Yeah,
and with hand tools.
Well, there's always a disconnect, and I guess Connie has pointed it out to us.
So, I'm taking notes here so I don't forget to follow up with you guys. That's the worst, when someone promises that and doesn't do it, right?
Right. Is there anything else, Conan, at this point, or should we wrap it up?
No, this has been really fun. I don't think there's anything else on my side. If anyone else has questions, I can stick around. But of course, thanks a lot.
Yeah, let me finish up with our closing comment. Evan, do you want to put on the next musical piece?
Taking it away.
It's summertime, 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 summertime.
It's summer.
In the 50s, summertime was polio time until the development of the Salk vaccine. The living was easy as long as you didn't catch it. This year, summertime is, as well as all other seasons, is Corona time. The history of communicable diseases in the US from the 17th century on is extensive. The earlier ones were connected to summer due to lack of sewage systems and clean water. Those problems still exist for many people in the world, but many of us are fortunate enough to take clean water and sewage for granted. Other diseases tend to go after children, the measles, whooping cough, which largely went away with the development of vaccines. The reason we mention them, living is risky, some years worse than others. In nature, there is change that can threaten our lives. In the UP, we have developed a health infrastructure where many of us take good health for granted. On the other hand, there are groups that inveigh against preventive measures. Summertime leads to restlessness as we seen it to congregate because we are social beings. Nature takes advantage of that. Thoughtful, cautious people temper their behavior. Some people are frustrated, take more risks, react more angrily to restrictions, a range of behaviors. Our suggestion, think what we have said about the ways you can protect yourself and your family in the outdoors. If you sneeze outdoors, it does matter where you are. Take precautions, you'll come out of it okay. Thank you for listening in tonight. And Evan, do you have any final comments before we head out?
I just want to thank everyone once again for coming and being part of this discussion and taking care when you go outdoors. Keep up the conversation with us. You can find all the links on upenvironment.org, and we will have more broadcasts soon. This is it. It continues to be.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you, Conan. We really appreciate your taking the time, and your extensive experience in this area really was helpful to us. Anything you want to say besides goodbye?
Well, make sure that everybody makes a big donation to UPEC. They're an amazing organization and deserving of your support.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Conan.
Okay. If there are no questions, I guess we will end the program tonight. So it's been another fun one, and I've really enjoyed working with Evan, and having Conan come as our guest is always a pleasure to have him speak to us. So good night, everyone.
Thank
Farewell, y'all.
you. See you soon.